first, reliable water, and a diverse abundance of life. These are interconnected systems, and the global commons are vital towards civilization, but they are also in crisis. Thanks to the work of many female scientists, researchers, activists, and more, we know that to restore the global commons and maintain planetary health, there's actions that we can take. And that's precisely the purpose of this session today, because now is the moment for action. Now before we go into COP, this is the context in which we're going to have this conversation today. So it is a pleasure for me to introduce our panelists. First, Professor Johan Rockström, the Joint Director from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Also with us is Nicole De Paula, a founder of the Women's Leader for Planetary Health. Quite convenient, the name for our session, Nicole. And Professor Gail Whiteman, the director of the Pentland Center for Sustainable Development. Thank you. No, I'm sorry, I got your title wrong, Nicole. Gail, can you please come and correct me then?
Yeah. Thanks, Dario. Hello, everybody. I'm a professor of sustainability at the University of Exeter and also executive director of Arctic Base Camp, which is a science communication platform.
I'm deeply sorry.
Not a problem. I used to be director of Pentland Center, so someone's given you an old bio. Probably.
Well, good that you're here and we can proceed. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to ask the three of you to give us a 5-minute introduction about the status of planetary health, the role of women, the role of science, and how do you see this conversation going forward, and what can we expect in the COP27 now in Egypt. So I'll start with Nicole, I'll then go with Gail, and I'll finish with Professor Rockström. So Nicole, 5 minutes.
Great. So good evening from Rome, where I'm speaking today. Very pleased and congratulations to everyone. It is a deeply committed group Friday evening and talking about such an important topic, but I think it shows our commitment. So we know, I think we are running out of acronyms to describe so many multiple crises that we see and how much they are, at least we're realizing they are deeply interconnected, right? We can talk about the crisis of food, fuel, finance, the triple planetary health crisis, the climate, biodiversity, pollution. But we are here because we know that the change is not only possible, but it's really urgent. And most of the times, the solutions that I think we're advocating here, they not necessarily require fancy technology or innovation. And the summit, congratulations to She Changed Climate. I'm very pleased to be here. As the summit is really trying to show that by investing in gender equality, everyone wins. And women, one thing that I really like to highlight, we have a tendency to really place women in this position of victims. But I think the one key idea is that they are really powerful seeds of positive change. From the start, I think one key message that we're going to have here is that when we empower women, we help to promote planetary health, and that's definitely a win-win for all. So our planet is changing very fast. The notion of planetary health really encapsulates not only the climate crisis, that's something that we really need, and no better person to explain that than Professor Rockström here. Of course, they're really all this crisis, they're deeply interconnected, the human-caused disruptions on Earth systems. So it's really beyond climate. But to safeguard this human health in the Anthropocene is really urgent to understand this growing challenge and act and collaborate and have a more holistic approach. So we need to tap into a collective intelligence. I think we heard parts of it in the film. This means also going beyond the academic walls, right? We need to recognize importance of traditional knowledge, and especially after the pandemic, changing direction is really urgent. And why? Because what we see is not only a recession. I think we are in I like the term that I once read, is a she-session. We are the last panel of the day, but I'm sure you heard many others sharing how women have been disproportionately impacted during the pandemic. And this can be seen a crisis of health, education, the burden of unpaid care work, gender-based violence. I would like to give one example from my own region, from Brazil. So in Latin America and the Caribbean, women were facing 1 extra hour every day of unpaid work during the lockdowns. Meanwhile, if you compare that to men, this was like they kind of 7 minutes more of additional duty. So, but the sad part in some reports was showing that the retrocession in terms of gender equality in Latin America is about 18 years. So it's truly alarming when you also see numbers, for example, in the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Report from 2021. It said that after COVID-19, we're going to have to, before it was 99.5 years to close the global gender gap. And now we will need only 135 years, 0.6. I don't know, put in the chat if you do have this time to wait for gender equality. Obviously, that's not something we can tolerate. So we're really virtually connected today because we want to shape this different future, a future that is sustainable and works for 100% of the people. So I'm really proud to be part of this group. And I think one of the things I've been working, I like to say I'm a fake doctor. My PhD is in in international relations. So I work a lot with people in public health, but you really need to break the silence for planetary health and connecting the dots between fields, people, discipline, institutions. So when I founded the Women Leaders of Planetary Health, really my goal was to demonstrate that these fields of health, environment, and gender, they're deeply interconnected. And one thing that I noticed is these communities were not necessarily talking to each other. And it sounds surprising, but this is something that I can go into maybe during our debate more details. So in fact, the social movements that are so important for real change, they're often fragmented. So by acknowledging these benefits that women bring to the table, I think we can start to close many gaps on sustainability. So unfortunately, humanity learns the hard way. We had to wait the COVID, this pandemic to recognize that we need to connect more the knots. But sustainable development will really happen when women's social, economic, environmental contributions are fully recognized and valued. Needless to say, we're not on track to achieve gender equality by 2030. I think there's a large discussion on SDGs of how much data is missing. Even I think 48% of data for the indicators on the SDGs are actually missing. So we cannot even measure how bad we're doing. So, I think we're all trying to, the main message is also we need to stop being gender blind, and climate policy is, of course, one example. So to conclude, to ensure this change, we need to dismantle the social and cultural barriers withholding women from leadership positions, because a lot of this conversation has to do, as I said, not a technical aspect. There's a lot of the culture that needs to change. Support future change makers in influential sectors like technology, and really disrupt this. I think there's an outdated systemic bias and prejudice that block women from accessing high quality education, financial support, to become actually successful entrepreneurs. So in 3 words, I think how to promote planetary health is really empowerment, partnerships, and action. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Nicole, and great timing. Gail, from your end, any reflections to continue this conversation started by Nicole?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say hello to everybody. And particularly, I want to say congratulations to She Changes Climate and all the work the team has done, and Elise in particular. I think this is absolutely a critical session. It's late here. I'm in Central Europe time. I've just finished a board meeting. I'm multitasking as always, as probably many of the women and men on this call are doing on a Friday night before COP27. I couldn't agree more, Nicole, that the issue of gender and climate is disproportionately aligned. And at the same time, statistics are one thing, but I want to take just a little bit of a step back and just talk about me personally. I'm a social scientist, and I do think social science, Nicole, is a real doctor. I'm also struggling sometimes to justify that, like many of us in the social sciences. And I'm not an expert on gender. I can only talk to it really from my lived experience and the data that I may look at in terms of global risks. But what I will have to say is that I remember being about 11 years old, and I was quite a shy child. I'm less shy now. And I was in a school auditorium, and I heard at the time one of the gym teacher, he got up and bear with me for this story. It gave a celebratory shout out to a donor that had given the school a special amount of new funding. And the new funding was going to go to a boys rugby team, which is fantastic. And I waited and I waited and I waited. I was waiting to see what would the girls get. And of course, the girls were not getting anything. And so I put up my skinny little shy arm and I asked, the first time I'd ever spoken in public, room of 800 people, and I was terrified, but I couldn't understand why there was not something going to the girls' team. And I asked my question, voice quivering, and he made fun of me. He said, well, what, can girls play rugby? And I have never been as angry as I think I was at that moment, where I suddenly realized that somehow by my gender, my performance was questioned and I should not be in the room. And if I was, I'd be humiliated. Now, times have changed 45 years later, but at the same time, we can still see that we have to have a session where we actually ask the UNFCCC or the heads of delegation to actually have 50-50 representation. And Johan, you had a tweet, I think out last week, which was a great one, saying that you were so tired of having to explain that the 1.5C number is not a target, is actually a real physical constraint. I could not agree more with that, but I have to add in that I am so goddamn tired of having to explain that women should be in the room and have a 50-50 split. I'm tired. And who else on this call, let's blow up the chat. Who else is goddamn tired of this? Really, I feel emotional. I feel like I have just about had it, that we are still in 2022 having a conversation that we have to justify that we should be getting half of the prize or half of the pie. So all I can say to those on the panel, that I am done with this. Someone else says they're very over it. Me too. Yeah, I'm goddamn tired. And I was going to say I was a lot more tired than just goddamn, but I'll just leave it at that out of the delicate ears that may also be on the call. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail. And for also this energizing talk and for getting us to put things in the chat box. I'm moving. Last but not least, of course, Professor Johan Rockström, your reflections, please.
Yeah, thanks. So the only way to top up Gail and Nicole here, which of course is singularly impossible, is to load the dice with some science. And I'm going to prove in the next 4.5 minutes that we actually need to do even more than Gail is suggesting. We have to go beyond 50%. We need more female leadership than just half-half. Why? Well, it's the following. We are no longer in the Anthropocene, dear friends. We are deep into the Anthropocene. We're 70 years into this exponential rise of unsustainable pressures on the Earth system. We are at risk of destabilizing the entire planet. So planetary health is about the stability of the life support systems for all current and future generations. Well, in the early 1970s, a theory was put forward on this whole challenge, the Gaia theory. James Lovelock put it forward, postulating that the Earth system is a complex, self-regulating, biophysical living entity which self-regulates but has tipping points where it can start drifting away in the wrong direction, something that we have to, in the words of philosopher Bruno Latour, care for. We need to care for Earth as a living entity. We need to reconnect to planet Earth. And as we have advanced our knowledge, we come to the conclusion that these are female values, the female values of community, of cooperation, of trust. This is directly in contradiction with the male values of individualism and competitiveness, the rugby team that you were referring to, Gail. So now, when we have to become stewards of the entire planet to avoid crossing tipping points that will commit all future generations to an irreversible slide towards less and less livable conditions, we can no longer have male values in the decision-making seats in the cockpit of the Earth system. We need female values to care for Earth. This, I would argue today, is quite well scientifically verified. In the early 1970s, James Lovelock was ridiculed for his theory. He was questioned by the conventional male scientific disciplines. Today, he is verified. 50 years on to the limits of growth, we've just published the Earth for All report. which verifies the Gaia theory. We have the third scientific update on the planetary boundary science, where we today prove scientifically the Gaia theory. But not only that, we show that 6 of the 9 boundaries are outside of the safe space. We have this urgent transition, and we only have 10 years to bend the curves. We need female leadership. So I'm sorry, Gail, you're wrong. We go past 50%. That's what the world needs. Over to you, Dario.
Love it, Johan.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Johan, for this comment. Before we go with questions, I wanted to ask you 2 questions that occurred to me. One, by the way, is not mine. It comes from the chat box, and I found it quite interesting. And I'm telling. One is, we're talking here about a binary approach, female and male. No, what about the LGBTI was put in the chart, the queer voices? How do we involve them in this conversation? What role do they play on this? That's question number 1. And I have another question for the 3 of you, which is, following of Professor Roxton. So to increase and to bring these feminine values and leadership, what needs to be done? Is it a matter of policy? Is it a matter of investment? Is it a matter of education? All of the above, none of the above? What needs to be done? So these 2 questions to start with. And whoever wants to venture, please, by all means. Maybe Nicole?
Just quickly, I mean, there's a lot needs to be done, as we say, more than 50%. And I think on the debate, I'd also love to hear from the audience and how to do this better. But the gender is a social construct, right? So I think you would include what our guests were commenting, and perhaps we remain a bit traditional on the speech because we're so lagging behind, even let's say on the basic aspects, that it's also, it strikes me that Friday night I have to spend, and I have to, and actually I even feel a little bit sick, not COVID for the record, but I said, you just do it because it's so important. And so one thing that I remain, that strikes me is also on the issue of budgets, right? When you have everybody, and you see at the COP now, and everybody, we're going to have a gender day, and everybody will say gender is important. Every leader will go there and add in this line on the speech. But I think gender, women empowerment needs to be beyond this speech lines, and this will change when we have budgets that are also gender sensitive, that we can calculate and put into real policies that would, fund the transformation. And you can see even in the basic case when in the United States, so let's go to, where there is a lot of entrepreneurs. I think female founders, they get about 3% of VC investment. So, and that's the United States. So what is happening in other areas when you have a lot of countries, and we don't need to throw a lot of numbers here and statistics, because in the end, statistics, they're not a destination, right? And political choices matter. And we're going to have to then make these political choices and change the destination of this statistics. And we're going to need funding, and we're going to need the recognition that, women also driving business is a good thing for the whole society. So that's just, I think, a beginning of the response. Thank you.
And Gail or Johan, any?
I can just two reflections. I mean, one is that, I'm a natural scientist. I have my roots in ecology, so it will come as no surprise to anyone that my view is that diversity enriches the outcomes for any resilience building or any positive thriving trajectory. So in my view, human diversity is valuable, and so it's not a coincidence that indigenous people are host to basically the 80% of the remaining biodiversity. It's not a coincidence that the more diversity you have, the more likely you are to have stable societies. But when it comes to how to accelerate gender equity, I mean, it's so popular to say that, well, we need role models. We need the Jacinda Arderners and the Greta Thunbergs and the Angela Merkels, just put them up in the limelight. And of course, this is fantastic and really important, but I think it's far from enough. We have to, it's a structural failure at the very, very basis. I mean, coming back to your story, Gail, I mean, we have to be able to recognize the difference in capabilities and aspirations at very early age, and really, water and support girl power from the very beginning. I mean, it's quite interesting that when it comes to demographics, the only thing we know works to stabilize demographic growth in the world is to ensure that girls get to school and have a good possibility of developing their life in school. And I think we just need a ramp up in investment on at the basics as well.
Thank you, Johan. Gail?
Yeah, thanks, Johan and Nicole. And thanks for those good questions, Dario. I agree with Nicole here that perhaps we were not clear what women or girl meant, and meaning not being as inclusive. So that would be my bad if I didn't make that clear. I couldn't agree more with the idea that diverse voices are essential and are exciting, are challenging, are provocative at times, and are certainly not always a smooth ride. So definitely I would agree with all of those comments. In terms of actually making a difference, I still struggle about like, what are those small tasks, those small things that can be small tipping points in a social movement in terms of changing the power. I do think that things like quotas really make a difference. We see that women on boards have only increased significantly when there has been legislation in place. I think the same thing should be in place in terms of delegations. There should be simply quotas. I know it's an ugly word. I wish it didn't happen, but it just doesn't happen fast enough if we don't have that. I also think there are micro moments, and Marco Lambertini told me this, and I was really impressed with it, where he had said some years ago, he simply would not go on a panel if there was not definitely more women on it than 0 or 1. If there was only one woman, he still wouldn't appear. Now, I don't know. I didn't fact check him. I haven't checked all the stuff he had been on before he left WWF International. But that kind of commitment, especially from a male speaker, is a powerful thing. So if we can get our male friends on this call and beyond, or get heads of delegations or of corporate leaders that tend to be still quite male to make those commitments, I do think that starts to make a difference. We need to have teeth in this, both from a social capital perspective, but also I just keep coming back in. It's got to be quotas. I just don't see how things ever move unless we have that.
Thank you so much, Gail. And I want to also not monopolize the conversation. So I want to see if anyone from our audience have any question they would like to bring forward. You can put it on the chat, or you can open your microphone and unopen. Please do notice that because we have more than 40 participants, if you have a question, please kindly, I ask you to keep it short and formulate it as a question, with a question mark at the end, more than a comment. So please go ahead, all our participants. Anyone who would like to come forward with a comment or question, please come forward. I'm sure that Nicola, Johan, and Gail will be delighted to answer. We have a little bit of a shy group.
Well, if I could just say, I love the chat here, the comment here from Anima, who says, another way of reframing this was saying we are overrepresented by 80% men if there are only 20% of women at the table. I mean, I do love that kind of reframing. Quite frankly, I think that's a pretty fun way. So nicely said, Amina. And apologies, my dog is destroying something, so I keep running out to do this. So I am multitasking, but still listening.
I think it's Friday night, people are getting shy, but I would like just to comment on this. Gail was saying that Marco Lambertini, but I see also I was today, last day, but I also work at the United Nations Food Systems Coordination Hub, and our director there has the same commitment. So I think a lot of these things that we don't go to panels, that is this old school way of, and I think before there was a lot of this excuses that, oh, we don't find women, it's just that we don't have it. But so this is kind of an old thing, and women have really organized and said, here, we have a list for you. There are many websites out there, and people getting organized to offer that the experts. So I just want to make one comment if we don't have a question.
Go with your
Yeah.
comment. I think there's a question from Elise.
Okay, no, please, let's go with the question first.
Okay, so first, Elise, you have a question, and then I will take the one from Clara on the chat. And there's
Thank you so much for this really, really inspiring discussion. So my question is, we're going to COP next week with the She Changes Climate delegation, and we're going to meet the COP presidency. What do you think should be the most important ask, the most important action that we should ask the COP presidency to do to address the planetary emergency, and obviously in relation to women empowerment? So this is a question to all of you on the panel.
Yeah, thanks, Elise. I can start. Well, I think the number one comes back and just kind of confirms what has been coming up time and time again, also before our session here in the video, that we know that to have a safe landing on climate, to have any chance on delivering on the Paris Agreement, it won't be enough to phase out coal, oil, and natural gas by cutting emissions by half every decade. We also need to keep carbon stocks and sinks intact in nature. And as has been referenced, and this is correct, that we've transformed half of terrestrial ecosystems into infrastructure, cities, and agriculture, which are today emitting massive volumes of greenhouse gases. 25% of the greenhouse gases comes from managed nature. So we need to keep the remaining intact nature intact. It's a global commons for the entire of humanity. And who are hosting this? Well, it's indigenous communities led by diverse cultures, with women very much in the driving seat. So I would put that forward as number one. Number two is to take a planetary health input. I mean, if you look at the human suffering from the global warming so far, the big numbers are in the health side. It is air pollutants. It is unsustainable food. It is all forms of impacts from floods and droughts and fires and disease patterns. And this hits vulnerable communities first, children and women. And I think that should be put forward as a moral obligation for all the negotiators in Sharm el-Sheikh, that we cannot accept this. And finally, I mean, everyone cares for children and future generations, but no one more than the mothers. And I think this is the point, that everyone needs to understand that just because we don't have a disaster today does not mean that we're not in the midst of a crisis. And the reason why we're in the midst of a crisis, which is because it's in the next 10 years that we determine whether or not we push on the on button to irreversibly cause damage that will impact all children in all future generations. And I think that's to me, it's a human argument, but it comes closer to a gender balanced argument, if we put it that way. Thank you very much. I'm going to go with some of the questions in the chat, because now the chat is on fire.
If I could just add
go ahead,
Dario, sorry.
Yeah, please.
Elise, of course, you ask the best question in the world. I expect nothing less of you, but very difficult to answer in terms of what one thing should we say. I mean, I think there always has to be at least two. First of all, we do need to have emissions by 2030, and we do need to increase the NDCs so that we are within a striking distance of 1.5. So I don't think we can never not say those things. They always need to be said. But in terms of gender discussions, I think there's a couple of them, and I certainly think that there should be quotas for countries to have women in the delegation and women speaking. I do think that is important. But I also think that the loss and damage discussions that will hopefully be one of the successes of Sharm el-Sheikh, that is a female discussion. And again, this is not just women, but it is absolutely female led in terms of the speeches that Mia Mottley gave in COP26, which were electrifying in terms of the already existing impacts on small island states and beyond. But in terms of the impacts on climate, those are disproportionately affecting women and children. So I think the loss and damage discussions are about, it's certainly a woman-centered or woman-focused discussion. And I think that needs to be made explicit. It's not. And my concern is that as soon as money comes into the room, like loss and damage or financing, the women go out of the room, and then male control over those loss and damages, those transfer of funds happen. And I don't think that should actually be the case. So I think we have to raise the flag that if Sharm el-Sheikh actually delivers on loss and damage, they better make sure that there's still strong female representation of how those loss and damage funds are actually distributed to those that need it the most.
And funny enough, Gail, that since you're talking about some of this conversation about loss, men take control. The question that I have coming from the chat is, what can men leaders, or what can men in general do to increase women leadership, women representation in these different topics, planetary health, in COP, etc. And the question, of course, it has a component that is addressed to you and to me, to you, Johan, and to me. What have you done personally to increase this women leadership in your own experience? And I can also share mine. But I think in general, I would also be curious to hear from Nicole and Gail. What can men do more to push this conversation forward? But I'll start with Johan. Johan, what have you done personally in your professional and experience?
Well, I can say that I'm extremely privileged, because in my area of work in earth system science, climate science, over the last 10 years plus, it's just remarkable what a significant trend line we're on, that the most talented, most dynamic, most innovative young students, PhD students, postdocs that we recruit at the Potsdam Institute. I mean, you should not quote me here, because this is between us and this call, are women. And this is, I would say it's quite significant, actually. So it's a slow variable. I agree with Gail on quotas, but I think on the longer term, we see a transition already, at least in academia. And of course, that's just, it's great, and we produce better science, and that's what we're measured against. And as a head of the institute, I promote that every day. So that is, I mean, one way of doing it. But I think another part of this is that we are very rapidly moving deeper into interdisciplinary science, transdisciplinary science, more action-oriented research. I think research methods that are more adapted to people and values outside of academia, but also for fitting in, social scientists, natural scientists from different disciplines. And I think that also helps to get more voices around the table, both male and female.
Thank you. And Nicole and Gail, what can men do more?
I just want to compliment, I think what Johan is saying is true, and all the numbers show that women are getting even more education and overall. But the problem we see is when it's at the top positions, we still don't see this equality. And there are so many examples that could be any area. Here we are on sustainability, but could be in business, medicine. It's kind of all the same story. And it's for a simple reason that, of course, there is an issue of family. When women, they might start at the same level in investment banking, for example, and then family comes, social roles, expectations, and that's when women get out of this positions of that can even, equally compete. So we need more support, and actually that's why I keep saying is changing the social expectations, because on more on your questions, and I think it's interesting the case of Iceland, when you say how can we empower women? Well, give more paternity leave to men and force them to take it, because even if you have a notion, they would say, oh, it's not socially acceptable to leave more than, 2 weeks. So these things must be considered. A lot of support, in terms of the family aspects, because that's exactly the moment when women tend to kind of, slow down in their careers. And I can see even, in international organizations, at the highest level, we have 26% of, I don't want to give the name of organizations, but, it's 26% of women at the top. So although the whole team that they are driving offices, you know, and doing the most of the work. So the leadership part, that's why we keep saying we need efforts on the decision making and leadership positions.
Thank you. Gail?
Yes, I agree very much with what Nicole is saying here, and certainly just to reiterate, Johan, you are a very strong supporter of women in science, and of just, you know, you seem to have a relatively gender neutral glasses on when you discuss science and when you're on stage with often many female speakers. So that's certainly to your credit, and you've been like that for the many years that I've known you. I think what can men do? I think I like simple things to begin with, or simple rules. How about they do one thing a day for gender equality? One thing could be a small thing, one thing a day. And how about they do things like they always bring a +1 that's another man to a female-led meeting like this. So always bring a +1 or +10 if you can, so that we don't have a bunch of women and a couple of fantastic guys on the call today. And vice versa, always bring a +1 female or a +2 female when you're in something else. So just have simple rules where you just start to mix it up, and you're both powerful men, but I don't just mean it to you, I mean it to really any of men. And I think those sorts of things can make quite a difference.
Thank you, Gail. And I'm going to take advantage of some of the good questions here in the chat. So one is in general, you know, we're having this conversation here, very active, but have you seen this level of engagement and this kind of conversation happening in other forums? And how can we, and do you expect having this kind of dialogues about gender leader and female leadership or diversity leadership in the course of COP27? Johan?
No, I would say, unfortunately, this conversation we're having now, at least in my work, is one of the richest and most important discussions in this area that I've had for a long time. So, I mean, I should say that every time we recruit a leading senior scientist at the Potsdam Institute, we spend a lot of time on gender and really put that at the kind of highest priority. But I don't feel, I feel that there's a tendency in climate policy, in business, also in science projects, to take things too much for granted, that we're not kind of really taking this challenge seriously, and we're kind of just floating along. So I would say I think it's lacking, I think, unfortunately.
Gail?
Well, you know, I don't think these conversations happen anywhere near enough. I do think there have been transitions. Am I on? Yeah, I'm not on mute. You know, I work at a university where our vice chancellor is female at the University of Exeter. Our executive dean of the business school where I'm on faculty is female. And yet I can still sit in an advisory board meeting, and because there are legacy roles of people that have been a while, it's still largely male in the room. And I think it's not about that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think you can have a lot of feminist discussions with a mixed group. But I do think we are nowhere near where we need to be. And I think it's not, talking is not what's going to change things. I really think it's action. I think it is just standing up and saying, not on, this is not on. And seriously, if every male speaker, every time they spoke, said, it's not on, this is not gender balanced, every single time, that would change things. And not just having it in conversations like this, as useful as this is, given that we're all dialing in on a Friday.
Yes. Nicole?
So many aspects. I think we need to, I see the change at least. What I think the good news is that, before it's really hard to have this conversation, but what I'm really interested in, I think it was a topic of this, this panel is the planetary health. I think Johan, you brought this, on the ask for the climate for too long. I think there was a problem of communication, right? We focus too much on the polar bears there for too long, and it's only energy. Even if you go to big think tanks, you wouldn't see experts in biodiversity or in ocean or gender, not even in our dreams. So I think now there's a little bit of a better understanding, recognition, and so the conversation is changing. However, it's still sometimes we need to fight this tokenization of. It's the same with women or youth. We need to grab these groups and put them because then we are diverse. But there's still a lot of this conversation that I don't think is serious enough, and that's why I really would like to insist on this issue of finance, because if we are not financing women-led business, if we're not financing movements, social, this is movement building, and we have always this conversation. I don't believe that women are here now with this image of taking care, we are caring. So we have men destroying, let's be binary for a second, please allow me to, business and the way that large business without any accountability, going to a lot of greenwashing, going to Sharm el-Sheikh to show greenwashing, and then we have this very difficult movements of women trying to fix the problem. So we need to shift in having accountability of especially large business, and empower organizations that are trying to make a difference, and of course improve the communication, because the strategic communication of planetary health is also an issue. We need to connect the dots. And at the beginning, I saw, when I founded the Women Leaders of Planetary Health, was exactly because there was no space. And I think we're the first organization who are really bringing people more in public health, who wanted to talk about climate change, and nobody would take them seriously in their schools. So it's also, changing how we are educating in a interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary way. So a lot of work ahead of us.
Thank you so much. And I'm mindful of time. So dear panelists, we have homework to do. And so the homework we have is that we, as an outcome of this beautiful panel, we have to take 3 to 4 action points to the policymakers, to the people in COP. So I'm going to ask each of you to give me one action point or one recommendation that you have in matters of planetary health and female and diversity, gender participation that we would like to bring to the COP, to those making decisions in COP. So I'll start with Gail.
I think I said that in the response to Elise's question, and I'm going to say I can't give you one. I'm going to give you 2, and it's the same 2. And it's the same 2. I think that we have to have quotas on delegations with women in leadership, and I think we need to make sure that the loss and damage discussion ensures that is firmly supported by women in discussions and distribution of funds. That was it's late now for me, so that was a bit of a ramble, but
no, it was perfect. Thank you so much. Johan?
Yeah, no, I'd like to, commit to something that I've been thinking about and doing partly, but thinking about quite a lot, which is that when you look at the youth movement, the most powerful voices are young female teenagers, and we'd like to engage even more with them, to share the science and to work with them. And I think we started already in Glasgow, and we'll continue at Sharm el-Sheikh, and that's a really one of the most inspiring engagements one can have with the youth movement in general, but particularly with the female young voices from the deep of the Amazon all the way to the Nordic part of the planet. So I'll continue working with the youth.
Okay, so youth involvement, in particular female youth. Finally, Nicole, you got the last word.
Difficult one. Of course, something that we didn't in my research is showing that is probably missing. So in the NDCs, we would like to see more actions for this, how much of gender equality there is perceived as an action for climate. And I think we need to track this a little bit better. And one aspect that we see, although the connections are quite, seems to be obvious, but we don't see enough on healthy diets, for example. So this connects also with health, nutrition, and women with this crisis we are seeing, they're really like, I think 11% more likely than men to face food insecurity. So given the geopolitics and other situation, I would like to see this better connections between, you know, female empowerment, better health for all, and of course, better sustainability in general. So that would be my recommendation. I just wanted to say also hello to everybody, many friends and colleagues, ambassadors here. So it's been fantastic. And I would like to really congratulate also the whole team of She Changes Climate. It's really an honor for me to be here.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to all, first of all the participants for bearing with us throughout the conference. It was very lively. You see the chat, really engaging discussions, and it was really, it resonated a lot what the panelists were discussing with those in the chat box. So thank you, participants, for being engaged. I know probably for you it's later than for some of us, but thank you on a Friday night. And of course, thank you so much to our three wonderful, excellent panelists, Professor Johan Rockstone, Gail Whiteman, or Professor Whiteman as well, and Nicole De Paula. Thank you very much for having joined us, and thank you very much for the organizers for hosting us tonight. With that, we'll take the 4 recommendations that just came from each of you, the panelists, and we'll put them in the final document that will go to the COP policymakers. So thank you so much. I hope you all have a good evening, and for those who are traveling to COP, I hope to see you there in person. Good evening.